welcome you to the Baccalaureate service for the graduating class of 1997. And we would like to extend a special welcome to those of you family members, relatives, friends. We know that many of you have come a long ways to be here, and we are so glad for that. And we'd like to especially congratulate our graduates this day on your graduation. The Baccalaureate service has traditionally been the last opportunity for the President to address the graduates. And our President, Dr. Greg Wainwright, will be doing that a little bit later in the service. It's also the last opportunity for the class of 1997 to gather together to worship in this place. And no, you don't get chapel credit today. I'd like to draw your attention to our order of service, which we will follow without further introduction or announcement. There is just one change that I want to point out. The first hymn is actually hymn number 203. It is "And Can It Be?" That is correct. It's actually hymn number 203. I'd like for you to take your hymnals now and prepare to sing that hymn. Carl Bryant will come and lead us in our opening prayer, and we'll remain standing for that hymn number 203, "And Can It Be?" Let's stand and pray together, please. Let's pray.
Father, we praise you for this beautiful day that you've given us. Father, as it says in your word, that this is the day the Lord has made, and let us rejoice and be glad in it, Father. We just thank you so much, Father, for those of us who are graduating today, Father, the faithfulness, how faithful you've been to us, dear Lord, and the blessings that you've given us and the memories that we're going to take from all the years, Father. And we just pray that you'd be with us today, and you'd be glorified in this service. We praise you, Father, and we ask things in Jesus' name. Amen.
people from a land far away. Is the Lord not in Zion? Is her king no longer there? Why have they provoked me to anger with their images, with their worthless foreign idols? The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. Since my people are crushed, I am crushed. I mourn and horror grips me. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then is there no healing for the wound of my people? Oh, that my head were a spring of water, and my eyes a fountain of tears. I would weep day and night for the slain of my people. Oh, that I had in the desert a lodging place for travelers, so that I might leave my people and go away from them. For they are all adulterers, a crowd of unfaithful people. This is what the Lord says. Let not the wise man boast of his wisdom, or the strong man boast of his strength, or the rich man boast of his riches. But let him who boasts boast about this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord, who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth, for in these I delight, declares the Lord. The second scripture reading is found in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 through 17. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Dear friends, I urge you, as aliens and strangers in the world, to abstain from sinful desires, which war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that, though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority or to governors, who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. Live as free men, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as servants of God. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the brotherhood of believers. Fear God. Honor the king.
Good morning. My name is Carolyn Bowman, and I'm from the class of RCO 55. I've been a wife for almost 33 years, a mother of 4 children, a grandmother of 3 children who live in Seattle, Washington. I've been a registered nurse for almost 20 years now. But most important, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I've been an active member of a church faith community all my life. But it wasn't until March of 1981, when I was experiencing a severe back problem, that I gave myself to Christ. Since then, the Lord has been working in my life in very powerful ways, and in that of my husband and my children, as they came to the Lord. My husband Jim and I have been music ministers in 2 churches, one for 13 and a half years and another for 7 and a half. We had some trying years, especially with our children when they were going through their teens. Needless to say, I was on my knees a lot. But I'm here to say that God is faithful. He hears our prayers. Today, we have a son who serves with mercy ships. He and his wife are aboard the Anastasius this very moment, and they are directors of the discipleship training course and have been for almost 3 years now. We have another daughter and her husband who live in Seattle, who are very active members in the church and are in charge of the newcomers program there. For a long time while working as a nurse, I had a deep desire to serve God in some type of ministry. I thought it might be along the lines of maybe Christian counseling. And in the fall of '95, I started calling some schools and inquiring about their programs. One of the counselors directed me to call some of the hospitals and inquire about their chaplaincy programs. This sounded is right up my alley. I did do that, and I was interviewed by 2 hospitals and was accepted into their clinical pastoral education program for 3 months, starting in December of '95. After I completed this, they encouraged me to get the educational requirements I needed to be certified as a chaplain. I heard about the REACH program here at Trinity, and it appeared that it would fill my needs and get me what I needed to get, along with some scripture and theology that I needed. So in March of '96, I started that REACH program. I'm here to say that if it wasn't for the grace of God, I would not be standing here today. There were many times I have had to lean on Him completely. And some of those times were while I was in school, when I had the pressures of exams and papers, just like many of you here. You see, when I started at St. Luke's and also in the REACH program, I had been out of school for almost 20 years. Today, I am going to complete 2 graduate courses in June, which I'm taking at Elmwood Church. It's an extension of Trinity. And I'm happy to say I was just recently accepted into the residency program at St. Luke's Hospital in Milwaukee for 9 months, their clinical pastoral education program for 9 months, training as a chaplain there. Now, when I complete this, I will be eligible to apply for certification as a chaplain. I am grateful to the Lord for all He has done in my life, and that of my husband and my children. He continues to work in our lives this very day. I would like to close with 2 scriptures which I feel describe my feelings and my love for the Lord at this time of my life. Acts 20:24. However, I consider my life worth nothing to me, if only I may finish the race and complete the task the Lord Jesus has given me, the task of testifying to the gospel of God's grace. Psalm 92:12-15, one of my favorite psalms. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon, planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age, and they will stay fresh and green. Proclaiming the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no wickedness in Him. God bless you, and thank you very much.
But the louder that I speak, I just grow deaf against His call. I could pray for years, I could bind my ears and my ears, and even believe I had the answer to it all. When it's all been said, when it's all been done, you'll ask me, did you go my way, child? Did you know my son? When it's all been said, when it's all been done, ask me, did you find your way within my son? I can sing His praise, I can try my life away to build a church that stands much taller than the rest. Or I can speak a language that you would understand. You write a book that tells the world my way is the best. When it's all been said, when it's all been done, you'll ask me, did you go my way, child? Did you know my son? When it's all been said, when it's all been done, you'll ask me, did you find your way within my soul? endless reward. But a wise man is he who knows himself eternally, and sees his value not in life, but in his Lord. 'Cause when it's all been said, when it's all been done at last, did you go my way, child? Did you know my son? When it's all been said, when it's all been done at last, did you find your way within my son? Did you find your way within my son?
Our mission here at Trinity International University is to form students who will transform the world through Christ. It is always my prayer that those who have studied here at Trinity will become biblically grounded, Christ-centered shapers of culture. Not simply people who mirror the values of society, but people who will go out of this place knowing the difference that Christ makes in the way that we think and the way that we live, and then to make a difference wherever God puts us. Now, I have talked about this and thought about this for years. Back when I was a pastor, I would often talk about that. In fact, when I went to a leadership conference in the early 1980s, I remember well, the question in a small group that we had was this: as a Christian leader, as a Christian pastor, what is your greatest nightmare? And I remembered answering something like this. At least the first thing that came to my mind was this: to have a church that was doing everything that a church does, and nobody in the community would even notice. And just going through the business of church and having no impact upon the society around it. Not being salt at all, not being light at all, just withdrawing from everything in that awful world and making no difference. So graduates, you can almost imagine what I would say to you as being my greatest nightmare as a Christian college president. And that would be to send graduates out of Trinity International University into the workplace, into graduate schools, and into various communities, and to have no one see the difference that Christ makes in your life. It's a nightmare. As I've talked about, this has been something I've talked about and thought about for so many years, that this gospel of Jesus Christ should have a transforming message upon every issue in society. Used to be when I would talk about that, I would always have certain friends who would just challenge me tremendously about that. You know, there are people in our churches and in the school too who have that great spiritual gift of irritation. I've been blessed with a lot of those, you know. And one of those, and he was a good friend in the church that I pastored while I was a student at the seminary, was an FBI agent in the city of Chicago. He was also a friend. Sunday nights after church, we would get together and play rook together, which is kind of a Christian activity, you know. And we would talk about these matters and the relevance of the message that was delivered, or the relevance of this good news for what was happening in the world. And sometimes he would almost scoffingly say, "Go ahead and show me, preacher, what religion and what the gospel has to say about what I'm facing." He was one of these people who liked to keep what he was doing a bit secretive while he was in it. Of course, he had to. He was involved in all sorts of things down in the city of Chicago, but once the case would break, then he would love to talk about it. And he had been involved in many things. He had investigated many of the leading politicians' activities here in Chicago, so much so that he didn't want to vote for anybody for any office in Chicago. He had investigated prostitution rings. He had investigated fraud and bribery that had taken place between the police force and morticians in Chicago. Anybody who reads Chicago news over the past decade or so knows some of those sorts of instances. And after each one, he would say something like this: "Show me how the gospel makes a difference in that." After all, he would say, Greg, this isn't a very pretty world that we live in. Now, of Of course, there are many parts of our world that are still very beautiful. I mean, today, we're experiencing a part of it, aren't we? There are still, in our world, picnics at parks, and children who fly kites, and rousing games of tennis, and graduations, and days in which we celebrate tremendously. But you and I have to admit that the world in which God has placed us, the world to which we send you as graduates, has many parts that are very, very ugly. And my friend in the FBI has seen some of the ugliest parts of them. And the question that I want to ask graduates, I guess in one of my last shots at thinking about this, forming your thinking in your life so that you can go from this place transforming the world. The question I want to ask is this: how do we as Christians respond when we find ourselves in the midst of some of the darkest places of our world, especially when we see that darkness, at least from my eyes, becoming more and more prevalent in our society? How do we respond when it seems that many of our religious freedoms, which we have reveled in as Americans, how do we respond when it seems that some of them are diminishing? How do we respond when there seems to be an increasing devaluation of life? You know that's happening. How do we respond to the ever-increasing rise in pornography, to the systematic breakdown of families, to ongoing and increasing racism, something which at one point we thought was over and we know is far from it? How do we respond to economic difficulties that leave even affluent areas like the northern suburbs of Chicago having thousands of homeless people? I guess we have a lot of options, don't we, Christians? We can ignore those things and hope they go away. We might try to organize some sort of armed resistance against any sort of government that would allow such things to happen. We could withdraw from the evil parts of the world and kind of form our own Christian monasteries. You know, just do Christian activities and make sure that our children, young people, never interact with non-Christians in this world. We just separate from this. We could say, well, what's happening in our world isn't so bad. Here it's graduation day, don't think about doom and gloom, and actually perhaps even participate in some of the evil that is happening. We could just look down our noses at all the people who are involved in that and condemn and judge them. You know, the Christians have done all those things, and I'm sure so many more, in a response to this fallen world. What should we do? Now, I'm not going to be speaking for the rest of the weekend, and I hope you know with a topic this big, and with issues this pressing, that I cannot give a full and final answer to that question of how a Christian really transforms this world through Christ. I'm still growing in that myself. But I think I do know the beginning point. And that's what I want to talk to us about this morning. And I think that the beginning response of a Christian to what's happening in society has to do with our hearts, with an attitude that we have. Just the basic perception, approach that we have to evil in our world. And in the text that Andy Smith has read for us today, I found, for my own thinking in my own life, quite a guide. It's found in the book of Jeremiah. It's not the most encouraging book in the entire world. but I do think that Jeremiah shows us the way. You see, the world in which he lived, though it was centuries and centuries ago, was not unlike ours. It was still quasi-religious, and ours is too, you know. Spirituality is something we can talk about. And yet still, this world was increasingly turning away from God, and had become quite dark, and so much so that God would tell Jeremiah, as his prophet, to go out there and tell the people of the world that they are judged. Now, what was Jeremiah's response to that kind of a society? I want you to notice that the first thing that he did was not to simply scoff or to laugh at all these evil people out there in the world, nor did Jeremiah withdraw from what was happening in the world. Do you know what his first response was? Maybe if you've had no background with the Bible at all, you don't know, but especially those graduating should be able to answer this. The first response to Jeremiah was that he wept. He was known as the weeping prophet here. And I have come to the conclusion that Jeremiah was one of the greatest people in the entire Bible. In fact, perhaps one of the greatest people in history. And the reason for that was that he wasn't great in spite of the fact that he is called the weeping prophet. But I have become convinced that his greatness consists in the fact that he was great because he was able to weep for the pain that he saw in his world. Chapter 9, verse 1, passage that Andrew, you may know this. Think about it. Think of the imagery. Oh, says Jeremiah, that my entire head were a spring of water and my eyes a fountain of tears. If they were, I would weep day and night for my people. These are the words of how a person of God responds to evil in the world. The kind of faith that we have has absolute confidence in what God is doing, and that God is sovereign, and that God is leading us toward an eternity that is wonderful. But at the same time, the faith that you and I embrace as Christians is a faith that can weep when we see people for whom Christ has died destroy themselves. And it's that attitude, graduates, that I pray will characterize our hearts, our lives, as we leave this place. That's what I want us to think about just for a few moments. There are three complementary parts of that attitude that I want to talk to you about quickly. Think about it from the life of Jeremiah. So think about the attitude that I pray that graduates of Trinity will have so that you can transform the world through Christ. The first part of it is this: that sometimes we need to be able to shed tears, tears of compassion, because of the pain of people in our world. Chapter 8, verse 21, Jeremiah would say this: "Since my people are crushed, I am crushed. Because of what is happening to my people, I mourn." Well, one quality that I hear people talking a lot about in our day is compassion. Something that everyone likes, right? People talk about compassion, but let me tell you the truth. I see very little of it. I see a lot of pity, feeling sorry for someone, but that's not what biblical compassion is all about. Did you know that? Compassion is made up of two words, and it has to do with suffering or feeling with. Compassion, to suffer with. So the biblical compassion is not feeling sorry for someone. It is the ability to feel sorrow with someone, to empathize with people who are hurting. That's how Jeremiah felt. If you read through chapters 8 and 9, part of his lament, repeatedly you find him talking about my people, my nation, saying, when I look around and see my people suffering, I suffer. I look at Jeremiah 8, verse 19, and sometimes I can just put myself into the shoes. Maybe this was my role more as a preacher, but I think it was the role of any Christian. You can hear the Christian hearing with two ears, two different voices. On one side, verse 19, you can hear the words of people who are going through tough times. He says, "Listen to the cry of my people from a land far away." They're saying, "Where is the Lord? Is he not in Zion? Is her king no longer there?" You can see what they're saying. "I'm going through a tough time." He could hear his people suffering, health going wrong, finances going wrong, families breaking apart. And they're asking this question that you and I hear in our world: why is God letting this happen to me? If there is a God who is good, why does he allow this sort of thing to happen in this world? So that's what our ears hear with one ear, right? And I hope that we're able to do that. But as the man of God, as the prophet, he is able to hear the God say with this other ear, "Why have they provoked me to anger with their images?" Do you see the conflict that the Christian feels? On one side, we really do feel with people who are going through tough times. And sometimes the difficulties and the pain that people go through seem to be exorbitant. And we can feel with them. At the same time, we hear God saying, "But the people in this world have turned away from me. What they need to do is turn back to me." And the person of God knows this, that the one thing they need to do is to trust God and to give their lives again to God. But the thing that you find, as Jeremiah found, is this, that the one thing they would not do is confess their sin and turn back to God. That's the one thing they didn't want to do. They wanted to live their own lives and still to go through without any difficulty. What I find happening here is this great man, Jeremiah, shows us why it is that Christians, sometimes, you and I must know tears. Because the God whom we love cares about people. Cares when people suffer. And the man and woman of God cares as well. So I want to ask you, do you ever just look around you? I don't know what all you've done during your years here at Trinity. I don't know where families and friends who have come. I don't know where you're living and where you're working. But do you ever look around you and just see the family problems that people are going through? Do you ever travel to the city and just look in the eyes of people and see emptiness? Do you ever look around you in the schools and see people abusing drugs and you know they're destroying themselves? We've had so many of our students who have been involved in the city helping AIDS victims. What do you think when you look at those AIDS victims going through what's happening with not only their physical but also their mental and emotional deterioration? Do you ever look at people who get married, friends that you went to school with, and they just can't manage their kids because they've never even been able to manage their own lives? They seem to be unable to have a healthy marriage relationship because perhaps they've never seen one in their own families. They're unable to discipline their own children because they've never seen appropriate discipline. Anything other than just ignoring evil or abusing when things take place. When those kinds of things happen, what do you feel? What do you think? Do you ever feel the pain that they are feeling and try to understand what they're going through? Or do you, as sometimes I'm tempted to do, just blame the victim? You know, that's the way it works. We're such rotten people. They deserve what they're getting. What does our world need as you leave a Christian institution? I'm saying that to begin, people in our world need other people who can feel with them, who understand the compassion of Christ, who when he looked at the grave of his close friend Lazarus and noticed that nobody understood what was going on, he wept. Who at the end of his life looked over a city, Jerusalem, that had absolutely rejected him, and instead of just becoming angry at them, he wept. We need people who will become an incarnation and an enfleshment of the compassion of God. Now, let me tell you, it's sometimes hard to show compassion to evil people. They don't always appreciate it. They didn't appreciate it when Jeremiah showed it. They tried to put him to death. They didn't appreciate it when Jesus showed it. Because compassion doesn't mean that we say, oh, just keep doing what you're doing. We call people away from that evil and call them back to God. But when we're dealt with harshly and we see evil abounding and people hurting themselves, what do we do? What's the first thing? Do we just go out and picket? Do we wave banners? Is the first thing that we do to write letters to the newspaper saying how our whole society is going down the tube like Rome? I mean, what do we do? I'm saying that we may have to do all those things. But the first thing that we have to do is to investigate our attitudes, our hearts. Because too many times we become like Jonah, just wanting God to destroy that evil bunch. Instead of having the heart of God. The heart of God would say, I see the evil of the world and I have found a way to deal with it. He sent his one and only Son, who is willing to take our place and offer salvation and forgiveness to all who will embrace it. It's that kind of heart that leads to a sacrifice that will make a difference in our world. See, the starting point to being those culture shapers for Christ, the starting point is not just political protest or getting angry at immorality. We may need to do that, but the starting point is that we have to learn to weep. My point would be, too many times Christians, we've come across with holier-than-thou attitudes to people for only one reason, because that's what we've had. Instead of people who are able to say, there, but for the grace of God go I. The only difference is that somehow the good news reached to me. So the first thing that I pray that our graduates will have, and I pray that it will grow in my own life, is that we'll be able to have attitudes that sometimes weep tears of compassion when we see hurting people. Second part of the attitude that I pray will be able to be characterizing people who have studied here is that I pray that we'll also be able to weep tears of shame sometimes for our own involvement in the evil of our world. I don't know if you noticed it, in the early part of what Andy read, chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, where Jeremiah prayed this, "Oh, that my head were a spring of water, my eyes were a fountain of tears, I would weep day and night for the slain of my people." But then this verse, "This is what I'd really like to do," he says. "Oh, that I had in the desert a lodging place for travelers, so that I might leave my people and go away from them." Can't you feel what he wants to do? He just wants to get out of there. Now, have you ever had a time when you just wanted to get out of a place? Graduates, you may be feeling that right now. Sometimes we want to get out of a place because of the stress that we feel, that academic pressure. I'm tired of all those tests. I'm tired of all those papers. Just need relief from the stress of life. That's not altogether bad. That's what vacations are all about. That's why sometimes we have summers in between all the academic pressure. Sometimes we want to get out of a place because we have a conflict with a colleague at work or a conflict with a neighbor. Mothers and fathers can say that sometimes you just want to get out of a place because you're frustrated with watching those wild kids all the time. I mean, we all have times in which we want to escape. That's a part of human nature. God gives us opportunities for that at times. But notice the ground, the reason, the motivation that Jeremiah wanted to escape. He wanted to escape because he didn't want to associate with those sinful people anymore. He was embarrassed because he knew he was a part of what was going on. So then in verse 2, not only does he say, "I'd like to get out of there," but he reaffirms, "They are still my people." In other words, as he looked out there and saw the evil and the darkness in the world, he recognized he was a part of it. Now I'll tell you, that's something that I found American churchgoers acknowledging way too little. Maybe it's that we're such individualists, we always think it's those rotten people out there who are doing all the things that are wrong, instead of taking time to look in the mirror and say, this pattern of thinking that is characterizing our world, I see it influencing me. This tendency toward immorality that is sweeping through our nation, I feel that temptation, and sometimes I've given into it. This tendency toward having a lack of integrity, to be able to sometimes justify unethical practices, how we do our taxes, whatever, that we find happening throughout our society. We feel those temptations and know that we've given into them. And there comes a time in which we have to recognize that when there are dark places in our world, that we look into our own hearts and souls and find darkness there. It really is a part of what should happen almost every time we gather in the church on a Sunday morning and open up this word and spend time in prayer with God, in which in our churches we should every Sunday have a time for confession. A time of recognizing, even as Paul would recognize near the end of his life, I haven't arrived yet. I haven't arrived yet. Taking time for confession and saying, but I'm going to press on. A time for rededication. And I see that that is something that was characterizing the life of Jeremiah. He recognized that he was a part of that whole society. He was a part of that people. And that if he became less sinful and more righteous, that his people would be less sinful and more righteous because he was a part of the whole. In the same way, how many times as a pastor I would hear people complaining about the hypocritical nature of the church. You ever heard that? Ever said it? Do you recognize that a church is simply made up of its people? And that if you are a part of that group and you become less hypocritical, the church then will become less hypocritical? Do you recognize that we are a part of a nation avowedly of, by, and for the people? It is our people. And that if we become more committed to Christ and more righteous, that will have an influence upon the whole. That's something that Jeremiah recognized as well. That this evil that was permeating the society, he was a part of it. So that his tears were not simply tears because others were taking part in this, but his tears were tears of shame that called him back to repentance, called him to rededication, and a recommitment of his whole being to being a man of justice and integrity, a man who was God-centered. And students, that's what I'm praying will happen in our lives all the time. This ongoing relationship with God where we meet with him regularly, find those areas of our lives that are being heavily influenced by what's happening in society, recommitting ourselves to Christ so that our thinking and our lives will not simply mirror society, but will be different and point people to Christ. So attitudes, one, shaped by sometimes crying tears of compassion because we care about the pain that people feel. Lives that are shaped because sometimes we are able to weep tears of shame because we see our own involvement in it, so much so that sometimes we just like to get out of there. And number three, finally, sometimes our tears, I didn't know quite how to state this, but sometimes I think our tears must be tears of grief because we see where our society is headed. Chapter 9, verse 17, Jeremiah would say, "This is what the Lord Almighty says. Consider now, call for the wailing women to come." Now this is so different culturally from what, but I still think we can understand what he's talking about. Call for the wailing women to come. Send for the most skillful of them. We don't want the mediocre ones, he says. But let them come quickly and wail over us till our eyes overflow with tears and water streams from our eyelids. Don't you think these are the most poignant tears of all? He already sees where they are and what's happening, but mostly he sees where the thing is headed. That people are walking away from God to an eternal destiny separated from God. That's what he sees. Now, students, you know, I think you know how much I love cartoons. I don't know if I should as a college president, but I enjoy them as a pastor too. I do enjoy them. I love McPherson, close to home. It's just about my favorite ones. I also really enjoy Gary Larson cartoons, Far Side. I don't know if you're disillusioned by that, but it's true. But let me tell you about the Far Side cartoons. There are some of them that really make me uneasy. And the ones that I read that make me the most awkward, feel the most awkward, are those that deal with hell and the devil. I mean, some of them are really funny. They are. The humor is there, like it's kind of the off-the-wall humor that you can find in these other ones. But there's just something about the subject matter that doesn't seem to be appropriate. And maybe it simply comes from reading what the Bible says repeatedly, because the Bible, not just in Jeremiah, but Jesus even more, talks repeatedly about these matters of judgment and hell and the devil, things that our society doesn't even like to talk about. The Bible talks about those things, and it is never a matter for laughter. It's a matter for weeping. Get the professional mourners out here, Jeremiah says. We need to cry, because look where we're headed. Unless there is a major change, people are headed to destruction. I know it's unpopular, and as we head toward the 21st century, to talk about matters of hell and judgment. But I'm going to say to the graduation today that we need to keep talking about those things. But those things are a part of the good news. Part of the good news. How can we ever say that that sort of thing, that evil is going to be punished, and the people who engage in it without finding forgiveness and justification are going to have eternal punishment? How can we say that's good news? I hope that you know why. Because unless evil is dealt with, we can never have a just world. We have to believe that goodness matters, don't we? We have to believe that evil matters and will be dealt with. And you know that not all evil is dealt with in this world, don't you? And that's why the Bible continuously says, God's voice, I will deal with it. Vengeance is mine. You don't have to worry about it. I will repay. I will deal with matters justly. Parents, you know you can never have a just home if you just let evil abound. If you just never even care about what your kids do, you will not have a just home. We will never have a just nation if our courtrooms would say, it doesn't matter what crimes people commit. No, the only way to bring about justice is to deal with evil. And the only way to have a just world is to have a God who, as a part of his good news, says, I'm going to make sure that evil is dealt with. And he has declared that so clearly that you can't get away from it when you read the Bible. Romans chapter 1. The wrath of God is directed against all that is unrighteous. Now, the bad news part of that is all of us have engaged in unrighteousness. And that's where the really good news comes in. Though everybody, if you read Romans 1 through 3, though everyone has engaged in it, but now a righteousness from God has been revealed. That God has found a way to deal with those of us who have done unrighteousness, and yet to forgive us. He had the one unrighteous one from above come and rescue us, taking our place and offering to all who will embrace him and be, using Paul's words, in Christ. In Christ, everyone who will become a believer, this opportunity to be children of God, to have sins cast as far as from the east is from the west. There is the good news you and I embrace, but that good news is not good news unless we recognize the bad news. That as you and I are sent as people who should transform the world through Christ, a large percentage of those people that God will bring across our path are headed toward destruction. And if we don't even care about that, we cannot weep tears of grief about that, we probably will not have the courage or the motivation to point the world to Christ. So a part of what I pray will characterize those who attend this school, those who continue to be committed to this work, is that we won't just laughingly talk about these matters of judgment, but they will permeate our hearts and cause us to care about people in the way that God does. A God who cares so much about that situation, about where people are headed, that he sent his one and only Son, who gave his life and bore the sin and death of this world upon himself so that things could be different. Brothers and sisters, my prayer is that we can continue to weep those kind of tears of grief as we see where people are headed, where society is headed. That's what Jeremiah saw. He saw his own people. He saw the land. Death, he says in verse 21 of chapter 9, has climbed into our windows, right here in Jerusalem, he would say. It's entered our best places, our fortresses. It has cut off the children from the street, the young men from the public squares, and it wasn't just the land itself. It was the people. Listen to what Jeremiah was saying. The dead bodies of men will lie like refuse on the open field. Oh, the people. Can you imagine if God were to show you that that's what's going to happen to your community? That this beautiful area here in which we live, with these trees out here that are beginning to bud and to be so beautiful, it's all going to be charred, God says. And the people for whom some of you have house sat, babysat during your years here, people will be separated eternally from God. Well, my prayer is that we will not become callous about that, but it will touch our hearts. So my question, graduates, before we celebrate this afternoon, is can you still weep? Do you still look at people and weep because you care about them? You have compassion for the pain that our world feels? Can you still weep because you can still look at your own life and say, I'm not yet what God would have me to be, so that those tears will motivate you to give your life again to God, fully to God, day by day? And can you weep because you see where things are headed and know that as dark as things may be now, unless people turn back to Christ, they can only be worse? My prayer is that those who are students who are formed in order to transform the world will be people who can weep as this great man of God wept and as God himself weeps. I mean, it's that empathy of God that motivated the cross. And it's that empathy of God's followers that will motivate a proper response to our world. Our mission, forming students who then will be able to transform this world through Christ. And my message to you this morning simply is this: we will never have minds and lives that transform this world for Christ until we have hearts that can feel what God feels. May we do so to his glory. Amen.
Certainly within the course of a college career, there are many students who excel in many areas. We honor them periodically through the year for excellence in athletics, excellence in
performance. And if you had been on the campus on Friday, May 1, you would have been in an honors chapel here, where many students were honored for a variety of areas in which they had excelled. There is one area, however, that we do like to honor the students for at this baccalaureate service, when their parents, extended family, and friends are here. And that is to recognize the students who are being added to the who's who among students in American universities and colleges. This is in recognition of outstanding merit and accomplishment as a student at Trinity International University, College of Arts and Sciences. It does have a minimum grade point average requirement to be considered, but it isn't grades alone. It's not only excellence in their academic performance, but in their service to the community here and elsewhere. So I'm going to ask these students to come forward, and I will present to them each a certificate that they may take, and trust will frame and keep it as a reminder of the work that they were able to accomplish while a student here at Trinity. It does remind me, though, of just this morning. I follow the book of Proverbs, actually a calligraphy collection of the book of Proverbs, and this morning from the Living Bible, there was a picture of a crucible. And it says to the effect that the crucible is for gold and silver, but a person is tested by how he or she receives praise. And we are indeed bringing honor to these students today. And as you put this on the wall, and remind yourself over the years of this honor, always remember that the praise and honor goes to God. Arlene Anderson. Jacqueline Lee Bush. Carolyn Bauman. Carl F. Bloom. Laura Brown. Brad Brooker. Kent E. Carlisle. Rachel R. Carlisle. Mary Ruth Kawajian. Christine Dravelis. Deborah R. Funk. Bethel L. Keaton. Travis J. Lockyer. Kristen Newby. Jonathan C. Nolan. Joanne Searing. Amber Dawn Sebi. Stephanie Strickler. Leroy S. Thompson. Thomas J. White. Charity Weeby. And Marcella J. Willis. And as Marcy comes forward, I wanted to share with you that in addition to this honor, Marcy was chosen by the Academic Council to represent Trinity for the Lincoln Laureate Award. One student for each Illinois college and university is selected, and it's a great honor. She was honored down in Springfield, Illinois, by our governor as well. Congratulations, Marcy Willis.
Good morning. I guess it's appropriate. One of the first times I was in this building was for the installation of Dean Peterson. And I got chapel credit, I think. And one of the first things that struck me was the size of this pulpit, this lectern. Notice how it can reach all the way over here. The last church I served at was a really skinny pulpit, and I'm not. So I'm grateful, I guess. In some of them, you have the plexiglass pulpits, and then everything's exposed. But here, you have this wide and deep pulpit. And in some ways, it obscures the speaker so that maybe you can focus on what he or she is saying, the message God's given them. And the award today that I have the privilege of giving is the Outstanding Senior Award. And is the hope of the Alumni Board that it is not just bestowed on one person, but that it draws attention to the working of God through the entire senior class that's graduating today. Now, by its very nature, we have to pick one person who excels. Let me give you the definition. The purpose of the Outstanding Senior Award is to recognize one senior who clearly demonstrates outstanding endeavor and accomplishment, to involve faculty members in the identification of promising student leaders for future Alumni Association leadership, and to reward exceptional academic achievement and college community involvement. Now, this is not an easy thing to do. It sounds trite, but the board really felt that the entire class is outstanding, and especially those who were selected by the faculty members. This is something that you can't do for yourself. In some cases, more than one faculty member recommended a student, others just one. But there's nothing that student could do to earn it, per se. They can't apply for it. So by that, each one of these students stands out, outstanding. So after interviewing each nominee, we discussed and we disagreed. We discussed some more. We discussed some more. We started arm wrestling. And we finally came up with our outstanding senior. Let me tell you a little bit about this person. See, one of the unique things this year was that we had two nominees that were engaged. And that was kind of interesting, trying to figure out, okay, dynamics. Well, this one was a resident assistant, was a teaching assistant. He was involved in helping with AIDS patients. He
a football player, a scholar athlete. He categorically denies any involvement in any pranks. He has a very good reputation for a hard worker. And when he was interviewed, he said, quote, "Trinity has a lot going for it," unquote. And in the rest of the interview, it wasn't the institution, the buildings, or even the faculty administration, although he gave them their due, but it was for the students to get involved. That the students set the tone of the university and the college. So it is my great honor representing the Alumni Board to present to you that don't know him and to introduce to you those students here who do know him. His name is Kevin Winger.
Will you please stand with me so we can have a closing prayer? Father, it is by your grace and your mercy that we have come this far. Lord, we give you thanks for the many blessings that you have showered upon us. God, I pray that we would take to heart the message that Dr. Wainwright has presented to us today, and God, that your Spirit would truly penetrate our hearts, that we might go forward being good stewards and responsible people of these gifts of education and involvement that you have given us as we've been here at Trinity. Father, may we represent you well. God, may you get the glory and the honor for the ways that we choose to live life. Father, you are truly worthy of our praise, and we humble ourselves before you, God, and pray that we would walk humbly with you as we leave this place. We pray all these things in the precious name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Michael, when he graduated, it took him a while.
Okay.
Ready? Let's go. Keep going. Sorry, I had to stop. Trying to do this as smoothly as I can. The famous trip all the way down to the gym.
Okay. Famous trip down to Jimmy. Unless that's good up there.